"Sir, please save him." The girl said it once, just once. Then she was done asking. She was standing in Ruth Calloway's doorway at 3 in the morning with no coat, no boots worth the name, and a 9-year-old boy in her arms whose lips had gone the color of a winter grave. Blood soaked through her left shoulder, old and dark. Her jaw was set. Her eyes were dry. She had not come here to beg. She had come here because her brother was dying, and she had made a decision that he was not going to. Before this story goes one step further, if you're new here, subscribe right now. Every week I bring you stories like this one. Real stories, hard stories. Stories about people who had nothing left and found out that nothing left sometimes means everything. Drop your city in the comments below. Let me see how far this travels. Now, let's go back to the winter of 1878. The winter that changed Ruth Calloway's life and the lives of 2 children she never expected to meet. Ruth Calloway heard the pounding at 3 in the morning and had the rifle in her hand before she was fully awake. She had been a widow for 5 years. She had been alone on this ranch for 5 years. She did not open doors at 3 in the morning without a rifle. That was not fear. That was arithmetic. She pulled the door back. The cold hit her like a wall. And then she saw them. The girl was 14, maybe, dark-haired, dark-eyed, standing in 2 feet of Wyoming snow with no coat and a man's flannel shirt soaked through at the shoulder with something that the lantern light turned the color of rust. In her arms, pressed against her chest with both hands locked hard behind his back, was a small boy. Blonde, maybe 9 years old. Lips the color of a sky before a storm drops everything it has. His eyes were closed. The girl looked at Ruth. Her face had already been somewhere terrible and come back from it. She was not crying. She was not shaking. She opened her mouth and said it plain and clean and without a single tremor in it. "Sir, please save him." Just those 4 words. Then she was done asking. "His left leg went through ice 2 miles back," she said, moving straight into business like the asking was already finished and behind her. "Temperature's wrong. He needs fire and warm water and somewhere flat to lie down. I've been carrying him an hour and a half." She looked Ruth directly in the eye. "I'll work every day of the time we're here. I'll pay back every cent of supplies we use. But I need to get him warm right now, ma'am. Right now." Ruth looked at the boy. She looked at the girl's shoulder. She looked at the road behind them, empty and white and dark. And she made a decision in the space of 1 breath. "Get inside," she said. The girl moved past her without thanks, without hesitation, without anything except forward motion. She carried the boy to the fireplace, the way someone carries something they have decided they are not going to drop. And she lowered him onto the rug in front of the fire with a carefulness that hurt to watch. She went down on one knee beside him and put her hand against his cheek. "Eli." Her voice changed on his name. Everything flat and controlled in it bent at the edge, just slightly. "Eli. We're inside. You hear me? It's warm." The boy didn't answer. "Eli." She pressed her palm harder against his face. "Look at me, right now." His eyes opened. Blue, pale as winter. Not entirely focused, but open. "Clara," he said, slow and thick and careful. "I'm here," she said. "We're inside. You're going to be fine." "Is it warm?" "It's going to be. Give it a minute." Ruth was already moving. Blankets from the chest, kettle on the hook. She brought a cloth and a bowl of water from the kitchen and set them beside the girl without a word. And the girl took them without a word. And for 20 minutes they worked in the silence of 2 people who both understand that there is a task, and the task comes first. When the color started coming back into the boy's face, pink under the white, blood finding its way home. Ruth sat back on her heels and looked at the girl's shoulder. "Let me see that." "It's fine. Let me see it anyway." "I said it's, and I said anyway." Ruth's voice didn't harden. It didn't need to. It just stayed exactly where it was. "You're not any good to him if that gets infected. Take the collar down." The girl looked at her for one long second. Then she reached up and pulled the flannel aside. 4 inches. Deep enough. Stopped bleeding, but sitting in wet, cold cloth long enough that the edges had gone unhealthy. Ruth got the medical kit from the shelf and cleaned it, and the girl sat absolutely still through all of it, jaw tight, eyes on her brother the entire time. "How'd this happen?" Ruth said. "Branch. Moving through the timber. It was dark." "What's your name?" "Clara May Birch." "His?" "Eli. He's 9. She paused. "I'm 14. Ruth tied off the bandage. "You didn't walk all the way out here from the Birch property tonight for nothing. So you can start wherever you want, but you're going to start somewhere." Clara May looked at her. It was the look of someone deciding how much truth the person across from them could actually hold. "Our father is dead," she said. 3 days ago." Ruth kept her hands still. "I'm sorry." "The timber barn burned. He was inside. Sheriff came out the next morning and said it was an accident. Lantern left too close to the hay." Clara's voice was flat and even. The way a voice gets when you have already forced yourself to say a thing 100 times inside your own skull, and now you are just reporting it. "My father had a rule about lanterns in the barn. His own father lost a barn to a lantern fire, and Papa swore he'd never do the same. He used a covered lamp. Always. Every night for 11 years. "Did you tell the sheriff?" "Yes, ma'am." "What did he say?" "He said grief makes people remember things different than they happened." Something in her voice went colder than the air outside. "He said I was a child, and I should let the men handle the investigation." Ruth was quiet for a moment. Then, "Who's been pushing on your father for the land?" Clara looked at her sharply. "You know about that?" "Everybody in this valley knows Harlan Voss pushes on land he wants," Ruth said. "I just want to know if it's him." 2 years, Clara said. "Papa wouldn't sell. Not once. Not at any price. He said the land was the only thing left of Mama that the ground could hold." She looked at her hands. "The morning after the fire, Cole Decker came to the house. He works for Voss. He said he was sorry for our loss. Said Mr. Voss wanted us to know the offer on the land was still open, that it would make things easier for us, given our situation." "He came to your house?" Ruth said. "The morning after your father died?" "Yes, ma'am." "To talk about the land?" "Yes, ma'am." Ruth stood up and went to the window. She stood there with her back to the room and looked at the snow coming down, heavier now than an hour ago, and she did not say what she was thinking. What she was thinking was not going to help anyone right now. "We left the next night," Clara said behind her. "I packed what I could carry. I took Eli out through the north field before dawn. I knew if we stayed, Decker would come back, and I knew what the second visit would look like." A pause. "Eli doesn't know it wasn't an accident. He doesn't know what I know." Ruth turned around. "What do you know?" Clara May Birch met her eyes. "I know who started it," she said quietly. "I was in the house barn loft that night. I couldn't sleep, and from the loft window I could see the timber barn. I saw the light before the fire started. I saw a man moving away from the building." She didn't look away. "He looked back once. They always look back once. I saw his face." "Clara." Ruth kept her voice careful. "Are you sure about what you saw?" "I have a good memory," Clara said. "Not boasting, just true, the way true things get said by people who don't feel the need to argue for their own accuracy. Papa said it was the sharpest thing he owned. I remember every face I've ever seen." She held Ruth's eyes. "I will remember Cole Decker's face until the day I die." The fire made its small sounds. Eli breathed steadily on the rug. Outside, the wind found a new way to work at the windows. Ruth crossed the room, picked up the rifle leaning against the wall, and checked it the way she checked it every morning. Habit. Discipline. Then she set it back and looked at this girl. "Where were you heading?" she said. "I don't know." And for the first time, something cracked at the very edge of Clara's voice. Barely enough to hear, just enough to know it was there. "I just knew I had to get him away. I knew I had to get him somewhere that wasn't there." She pressed her lips together hard. "I thought there'd be someone. Papa always said if you walk long enough in the right direction, you find someone." "He sounds like he was a smart man," Ruth said. "He was a good man," Clara said. "There's a difference." Ruth looked at her for a long moment. Then she went to the kitchen and put together something to eat, because people think better when they're not running on empty. And she had a feeling they were both going to need to think very clearly, very soon. She was at the stove when she heard Clara's voice from the main room, low and careful. "Eli, hey, don't try to sit up. Where are we?" the boy said. "Someone's house. A rancher. She helped us." "Is she nice?" A pause. "She's practical," Clara said. "Which is better." Ruth almost smiled. She kept it to herself. She brought the food back in and found Clara asleep in the chair, back straight, hands folded, completely gone between one breath and the next. Her body had made a decision her mind hadn't gotten to yet. Ruth set the plate on the side table, found a blanket, put it around the girl's shoulders without waking her. Then she stood in the middle of her own main room and looked at these two children and thought about every careful arrangement she had made of her life in the 5 years since Daniel died. Contained. Manageable. Hers alone. She thought about that. Then she loaded the second rifle, set it by the bedroom door, put a chair under the front door handle on top of the bolt, and sat down to wait out the night, with the first rifle across her knees. Because Cole Decker was the kind of man who found out where things had gone, and no storm was a guarantee. She did not sleep. She sat and watched the fire and listened to two children breathe, and thought about Harlan Voss, about the one time she had sat across from him at a county meeting and watched him smile with all his teeth and none of his eyes. She thought about the way he had said, "I hope we might do business under better circumstances someday," after she had turned down his arrangement on the South Pasture water rights. She had thought about that smile sometimes since then. She thought about it now. Sometime past 4, the boy opened his eyes. He lay still for a moment, the way children do when they wake somewhere unfamiliar, reading the ceiling and the light and the sounds. Then he turned his head and found his sister in the chair with the blanket around her. Every single thing in his small face relaxed. "She hasn't slept in 2 days," he said, quietly, like he was reporting something that mattered, like he needed someone to know. "I figured," Ruth said. "She keeps saying she's fine." He looked at Ruth. "She's not fine, but she won't let me say so." "She's trying to protect you," Ruth said. "I know." His voice was 9 years old and about 40 years old at the same time. "She's always doing that, even before." He pulled the blanket tighter around himself. "Are you going to make us leave in the morning?" Ruth looked at this boy who asked the question the way someone asks who already has a guess at the answer, and has decided they can take it either way. Not in the morning, she said. Because of the storm? Partly. He thought about that. What's the other part? Ruth looked at him. Because your sister didn't come all this way in the dark, carrying you on her back, to get turned around at a door, she said. And I'm not in the habit of making things that hard into nothing. Eli Birch was quiet for a moment. Then, she said there'd be someone. When we were walking. I didn't believe her. What do you think now? He looked at Ruth with those pale blue eyes that had already seen more than blue eyes that age should see. I think she's usually right, he said. About most things. He closed his eyes. Don't tell her I said that. She'll get worse. He was asleep in 4 minutes. Ruth sat in the dark and held the rifle and watched the door. An hour before dawn, she heard it. A horse on the road. One horse, moving slow and deliberate, the way a man moves when he wants it known he is not sneaking, because he doesn't need to sneak. She was at the window before the sound finished registering. The rider came through the gate at a walk, alone. Charcoal coat, hat pulled low. He sat the saddle with the ease of a man who has spent his whole life on horseback, and stopped noticing the effort. He pulled up in the yard and looked at the house and went completely still. Ruth knew that stillness. She had seen it twice before, and both times it had left her with a feeling of having been measured for something she had not agreed to. Cole Decker. The scar on his left jaw, pale and curved, visible even in the gray pre-dawn light. Patient. Quiet. Already calculating. She moved to the door, left the rifle inside. Picking it up made a statement before she'd decided what to say. She opened the door when he hit the second porch step and stood in the frame of it and let the cold come in around her, and did not step back from either. Mrs. Calloway. He took the hat off, very smooth, very practiced. Sorry for the early hour. Hope I haven't disturbed you. You have, she said. What do you need, Mr. Decker? Something moved fast across his face, gone before it landed. I'm looking for 2 children, a girl, 14, and her younger brother. They left their family property 2 nights ago. Given the weather, Mr. Voss is very concerned about their welfare. I'm sure he is, Ruth said. You haven't happened to see them. They'd have been on foot, heading this direction from the Birch property. Ruth looked at him. She looked at the scar on his jaw. She thought about a 14-year-old girl in a loft window, with a good memory, and a face that had already been somewhere terrible and come back dry-eyed. I haven't seen any children, she said. 1 beat. 2. Just long enough for both of them to understand what was happening, without either of them saying so. Well, Decker put the hat back on, smiled. Good smile. Expensive. If you do come across them, I'd appreciate a word at the sheriff's office. Mr. Voss just wants to make sure they're looked after. Of course, Ruth said. He touched his brim, walked back to his horse. Mounted smooth and easy, rode back through the gate and down the road until the gray morning swallowed him whole. Ruth stood in the doorway and watched him go, and counted to 60 after the sound of hooves faded. Then she stepped back inside and bolted the door. Clara May was standing in the middle of the room, awake, upright. She had heard every word. Ruth could see it in her face. The math already done, the answer already arrived at, and the answer not good. He'll be back, Clara said. Yes, Ruth said, with more people. Probably by midday. Clara looked at her steadily. You lied to him. I told him I hadn't seen any children, Ruth said. That's accurate. I've seen 2. There's a difference. Clara stared at her. Then something happened in her face. Something small and unguarded, and gone almost before it was there. The specific expression of a person who has been braced against something for so long that when it doesn't come, the body doesn't quite know what to do with the space where the bracing was. "What do we do?" she said. Ruth crossed to the wall and took the rifle down. Checked it clean and certain, the way she did every morning. The way Daniel had taught her the first winter they spent on this land. Because Wyoming didn't ask if you were ready before it sent you something to deal with. She looked at Clara. "We make breakfast," she said, "because today is going to be long, and long days go worse on an empty stomach. And then we figure out who in this town still has a spine left in them. Because Decker going back to Voss empty-handed this morning means tonight is not going to look like this morning did." Clara didn't move. "Why are you doing this?" Ruth picked up the rifle and looked at this girl. This 14-year-old girl with a dead father and a sleeping brother, and one good shoulder and the name of the man responsible held somewhere inside her like a coal that hadn't gone cold yet. "Because you walked 1.5 miles in a Wyoming blizzard carrying a child on your back," Ruth said. "And when I opened the door, you didn't ask me for a single thing you didn't intend to pay back." She held the girl's gaze. "That's the kind of person I open my door for." Clara May was quiet for 3 full seconds. "Thank you," she said. Low. Real. No performance in it at all. "Don't thank me yet," Ruth said. "We're not through this." She moved toward the kitchen. "Come on, let's see what we've got." Clara followed. Behind them, Eli slept on in front of the dying fire, one hand curled under his chin, the color back in his cheeks, breathing easy and even, and entirely unaware that outside the locked door and the bolted windows, a man in a charcoal coat was already riding back toward Greystone Pass with no answer and a patience that had a very specific and very near expiration date. The snow was still coming down. It was not going to stop. And somewhere in the gray morning between the ranch and the town, Cole Decker was doing mathematics. And the mathematics, when they resolved, were going to point straight back here. Breakfast in Ruth Calloway's kitchen was a quiet thing, but it was not an empty quiet. It was the kind of quiet that two people make when they are both thinking hard and have enough respect for each other to do it without filling the air with noise that doesn't help anything. Clara ate like someone who had not eaten in longer than she was going to admit. She did it without drawing attention to herself, which was its own kind of discipline in a 14-year-old. She finished what was on her plate and did not ask for more, and Ruth got up and put more on it anyway without saying a word about it. And Clara ate that too. When the plate was clean, she wrapped both hands around the tin cup of coffee Ruth had poured her and looked across the table. "Decker's going to tell Voss I'm not here," she said. "Yes," Ruth said. "Voss won't believe him." "No," Ruth said. "He won't." "So what does Voss do next?" Ruth set her own cup down. "He thinks it through. He's a man who thinks before he moves. That's what makes him dangerous. He doesn't act on anger, he acts on calculation. So he's going to calculate." She looked at Clara steadily. "He's going to figure out that you came this direction. He's going to figure out that this was the closest ranch to where you'd have been walking, and then he's going to send Decker back here with something bigger than a polite question and a good smile." Clara nodded slowly. She had already arrived at the same place. Ruth could see it. She had just wanted to hear someone else say it out loud to confirm the math. "How long?" Clara said. "By tonight," Ruth said. "Maybe sooner if the storm breaks." "The storm's not breaking today," Clara said. "It's going to get worse before noon. I watched the sky when we were walking last night. The clouds were still building west." Ruth looked at her. You read weather? Papa taught me, Clara said. He said a rancher who can't read the sky is a rancher who gets caught. Something moved in her face on the word Papa, quick and private, and she pushed it back down before it could become anything larger. He taught me a lot of things. He was that kind of man. What kind? The kind who thought his daughter needed to know how the world actually worked, Clara said. Not how people said it worked, how it actually worked. Ruth was quiet for a moment. She thought about Daniel, about the first winter on this land, about a man who had believed the same thing and had spent every evening at the kitchen table teaching her every practical thing he knew, because he had understood, without saying so, that the world out here did not make exceptions for what you didn't know how to do. Your father was right, she said. Clara looked at her hands around the cup. I know, she said quietly. I just wish he'd had more time to finish. From the main room came the sound of Eli stirring. Clara was up and through the doorway before Ruth had pushed back her chair. The boy was sitting up on the rug, blinking at the fire. He had his sister's dark coloring, but their father's eyes, Ruth had decided. That specific pale blue that looked almost clear in certain light, like water over a clean stone bottom. He looked at Clara with the focused relief of someone checking inventory. Your shoulder, he said immediately. It's fine, Clara said. You said that about your knee last spring, and you walked wrong for 2 months. This is different. You always say that too. He looked past her at Ruth, standing in the doorway. He seemed to be running some kind of interior assessment. Then he said, Thank you for letting us in, ma'am. Don't mention it, Ruth said. Clara says we're going to work for our keep. Clara can speak for herself, Clara said. I'm just making sure you know we're serious, Eli said. He said it with a directness that had nothing childish in it. We don't take things we can't pay back. I got that impression, Ruth said. How's the leg? Eli looked down at his left leg, stretched out in front of him, and moved it carefully. Something crossed his face that he controlled quickly. It's all right, he said. It's not broken, Clara said. I checked last night when you were asleep. The knee's swollen, but the bone's sound. You need to stay off it today. I can off it, Clara said. That's not negotiable. Eli closed his mouth. He had the look of someone who had tried that particular argument before and knew the landscape of it well enough not to waste energy on it. Ruth moved to the window. The snow was coming down harder, the way Clara had said it would. The road was invisible. The gate was barely a shape in the white. Good and bad at the same time. Decker couldn't move easily in this, but neither could anyone Ruth might want to reach. She thought about who she needed to talk to. Silas Morrow lived 1.5 miles east, at the edge of the timber where the Callaway land ended and the open range began. He had been deputy sheriff in Greystone Pass until 2 years ago, when he had told the wrong person the truth about something he'd seen on Voss's property, and had been quietly removed from his position and quietly absorbed back into private life without enough noise that anyone had to officially take sides. He still lived out here. He still knew things. Agnes Fuller ran the Greystone Pass boarding house and had been doing so for 30 years. She knew every person in that town, and she knew most of what they had done and some of what they were planning. She had opinions about Harlan Voss that she expressed only in private and carefully, and only to people she had decided were worth the risk. Ruth had been inside Agnes's circle of trust for 11 years. She had earned it slowly, the way you earn things from a woman who has been disappointed by the world enough times to require evidence before she hands out anything valuable. The question was whether Agnes would give Ruth what she actually needed right now, which was not information. Ruth had enough information. What she needed was a witness who wasn't Ruth Callaway, and a voice in that town that people listened to. She was still at the window working through the mathematics of it when she heard Eli's voice from behind her. The man who came this morning, he said. "He was looking for us." Ruth turned around. The boy was watching her with those clear, pale eyes. Not frightened, just clear. "Yes," she said. "He works for Voss." Ruth looked at Clara. Clara had gone very still. "How do you know that?" Ruth said. "I know his horse," Eli said. "Gray with a black mane and a white sock on the left foreleg. I've seen that horse tied outside our property twice in the last month. Once when Papa was out in the fields and couldn't see. Once when Clara was in town with the wagon." He paused. "I didn't tell Clara because I didn't want to worry her. I told Papa, and he said to remember the horse, but not to mention it again." He looked at his sister. "I'm sorry I didn't say something sooner." Clara was very still for 3 full seconds. Then she moved to her brother and sat beside him on the rug, and put her hand on the back of his neck, the way you put your hand on the back of someone's neck when words don't have the right shape for what you need to say. "You didn't do anything wrong," she said, quiet and absolutely certain. "I should have told you. Papa told you not to. You did what Papa said." She kept her hand where it was. "That's not on you, Eli." The boy leaned into her hand slightly, just for a moment, and then straightened back up. "He came twice," he said to Ruth, "before the fire. That means Voss knew what the property looked like. He knew where the timber barn was. He knew where Papa worked at night." Ruth looked at this 9-year-old boy who had just laid out a logical sequence that most grown men in this county would have taken 3 days to assemble, and she felt something move in her chest that was specifically and only the recognition of a particular kind of mind encountering a problem it was built for. "You're right," she said. "Cole Decker," Clara said. It wasn't a question. She was just saying the name out loud to put it in the right place in the sequence. The way you set a piece down on a table when you finally understand where it goes. "2 visits to survey the property," Ruth said. "Then the fire." She looked between them. "Your father's deed. Do you have it?" Clara reached into the neck of the flannel shirt and pulled out a piece of oilskin, folded tight and tied with a cord she wore against her skin. She held it up. "Papa gave it to me when Voss made the 3rd offer," she said. "He said keep it somewhere they can't get to without getting through you first." She tucked it back. He said it like he was joking. He wasn't joking. "No," Ruth said. "He wasn't." She moved to the door, pulled her coat off the hook, and started putting it on. "Where are you going?" Clara said. "There's a man 1.5 miles east of here, Silas Morrow. He used to be deputy sheriff until Voss decided he'd rather have a different kind of law in this town." She buttoned the coat without hurrying. "He knows every piece of what Voss has been building in this county for the past 4 years, and he's been waiting for a reason to stop sitting on it." "You think we're a good enough reason?" Clara said. "I think a dead father and a 14-year-old girl who saw the man who lit the match is about the best reason this county is going to get," Ruth said. She picked up the rifle. "I'll be gone 40 minutes, maybe 50. You bolt this door when I leave. You do not open it for anyone. Not for Decker, not for the sheriff, not for anyone who says they're a friend of mine. Because I don't have friends who'd come knocking in a storm I didn't send for." She looked at Clara hard. "You understand me?" "Yes, ma'am." "If you hear horses, and it's not me, you take your brother to the back room. You go into the floor space under the far wall where the boards lift. There's a handle on the 3rd plank from the left. And you stay there, quiet, until you hear my voice. My voice, specifically." She held Clara's eyes. Not a voice saying, "It's me." My voice. Clara met her gaze without flinching. "Understood." Ruth looked at Eli. "You do what your sister says." Eli nodded once, clean and simple. "Always do," he said. Ruth went out into the snow. She was back in 43 minutes. She came through the door, shaking snow from her coat, and Clara had the bolt off before she finished knocking, because she had been listening for footsteps, and had learned, apparently, the specific sound of Ruth's boots in the snow versus anything else. "Well," Clara said. Ruth hung her coat. She moved to the stove and put her hands over it, because 43 minutes in a Wyoming storm in that direction and back was 43 minutes of serious cold, even for a woman who had been doing it for 20 years. "Silas is coming," she said. "When?" "He's already on his way. He'll come through the back field to stay off the road." She turned to face them both. "He has something I didn't know about. He kept records. 2 years of records. Dates, times, what he saw, what he was told to ignore, and by who. He wrote it all down in a ledger he's been keeping locked in the floor of his cabin, because he said he knew someday it was going to matter, and he wanted to be able to prove it when it did." Clara was very still. "What kind of records?" "The kind that put Cole Decker at 2 other properties before they were sold to Voss," Ruth said. "The kind that show a pattern. Your father wasn't the first, Clara. He was the 6th. And he was the first one who didn't sell before Decker found another way to solve the problem." The room went quiet. Eli spoke first. "So there are other families," he said. "5 of them," Ruth said. "All sold under pressure, all in the last 3 years. All on land that sits on timber Voss wants, or water Voss needs." She looked at Clara. "If Silas's records go in front of the right person, your father's case doesn't stand alone. It's part of a documented pattern. That's a different thing in a courtroom than one girl's word about one fire." Clara's jaw was working. She was holding something carefully. Ruth could see it, something large and pressurized that she was not going to let out in front of her brother. "There's a circuit judge," Ruth said. "Judge Walter Briggs. He comes through this territory every 6 weeks. He's not Voss's man. He's old enough and far enough from Voss's money that he doesn't need to be." She kept her voice even and steady. "The storm's going to have him stop somewhere between here and the next town. Maybe at Agnes Fuller's boarding house, which is where travelers stop in Greystone Pass when the road closes." She paused. "I need to get a letter to Agnes." "In this storm?" Clara said. "Agnes has a boy who runs messages," Ruth said. "He's 16 and he does it for coin, and he has better sense than to let Voss's men see him do it, because Agnes has raised him careful." She looked at Clara. "If Agnes gets a letter from me with what Silas and I put together, and if Briggs is sitting in her boarding house waiting out this storm, then we have an opportunity that we are not going to get twice." Clara was quiet. Her hands were in her lap, and she was looking at them with a particular expression of someone working through risk versus stakes versus the cost of doing nothing. "He's going to move on this house," she said. "Voss, tonight or tomorrow. He's not going to let Decker come back empty-handed twice." "No," Ruth said. "He's not." "So we have less time than the storm gives us." "Yes." "And if we get the letter to Briggs, and Briggs takes it seriously, Voss finds out. And then whatever he was going to do, he does faster." "Yes," Ruth said. "That's exactly right." Clara looked up. Her eyes were clear and very steady, and entirely decided. "Then we'd better do it fast enough that it doesn't matter," she said. A knock at the back door made all 3 of them go still. 3 knocks. A pause. 2 more. The kind of knock that is a signal rather than an accident. Ruth let out the breath she'd been holding. "That's Silas," she said. She went to the back door and opened it. Silas Morrow was 61 years old and looked like a man who had been carved out of something that didn't have any give in it. He was not tall, but he was solid in the way that stone is solid. And he had a face that time and weather and a particular kind of long-held anger had worked into something that was past expression and into simple fact. He came inside, shook the snow off his coat, and looked at Clara and Eli with the direct, assessing eyes of a man who has spent his life reading situations fast. "These are the Birch children," he said. "Yes," Ruth said. He looked at Clara for a long moment. "You saw him," he said. It was not a question. He had read something in her face that told him before she answered. "Yes," Clara said. "Cole Decker, from the loft window. I saw his face when he looked back." Silas nodded once, slow and final, like the last piece of something clicking into its place after a long time. "Your father wrote to me 6 months ago," he said. "He told me what Voss was doing. He told me he was keeping records of his own." He reached into his coat and pulled out a ledger, thick and battered and wrapped in oilcloth. He set it on the table. "I've been keeping mine since before that. Didn't know his were still somewhere." He looked at Clara. "Do you know what happened to his records?" Clara reached into the saddlebag she'd kept beside her since she walked through Ruth's door. She pulled out a smaller ledger, cloth-bound, the cover warped from cold and damp. She set it on the table next to Silas's. "He kept it in the root cellar," she said, "wrapped in oilskin. I knew where it was. I took it when we left." Silas stared at the two ledgers side by side on Ruth Calloway's kitchen table. Then he looked at this 14-year-old girl, and something moved through his face that was not soft exactly. It was more like the particular expression of a man who has been waiting 2 years for a door to open, and is only now understanding that the person who finally opened it was not who he expected. "Your father was a smart man," he said. "He was a good man," Clara said. "There's a difference." "In this case," Silas said, "he was both." He pulled out a chair and sat down and put his hands flat on the two ledgers. "All right. Tell me everything you saw. From the beginning. Leave nothing out. Because what's in these 2 books, plus what's in your memory, is the first real case anybody's had against Harlan Voss in 3 years of trying. And we need to build it right." Clara sat down across from him. Eli pulled himself to the edge of the rug and sat up straight with his bad leg out in front of him, and his eyes on his sister. Ruth put the kettle on. Outside, the snow was coming down harder than it had all morning, the way Clara had said it would, and the road had disappeared entirely. And somewhere in Greystone Pass, a man in a charcoal coat was telling a well-dressed man in a warm office that the Birch girl wasn't at the Calloway ranch. And the well-dressed man was smiling, and the smile didn't reach his eyes, and he was already calculating. Silas Morrow asked his questions the way a man asks questions when he has been waiting a long time to ask them, and is not going to waste a single one. He went through Clara's account from the beginning, and he did not rush her, and he did not fill in her sentences for her, and he did not tell her what he thought she meant before she finished saying what she actually meant. He just listened, and wrote, and asked the next question. Clara answered the same way, flat, precise, chronological. She had a gift for sequence. She told it the way it happened, in the order it happened, without decoration, and without editorializing. And the story she told was worse for the plainness of it than it would have been with any amount of drama added on top. Eli sat at the edge of the rug, with his bad leg straight out in front of him, and said nothing. But Ruth watched his face while his sister talked, and saw the moments when something landed that he hadn't known before. He was quiet about all of it. He had the discipline of a child who has understood, without being told directly, that right now his job is to be small and still, and let the people who can do something get on with doing it. When Clara finished, Silas opened her father's ledger and read it in silence for 10 minutes. Ruth refilled his coffee, and he didn't notice. Then he opened his own and laid them side by side and ran his finger down the columns of his own dates and compared them to Thomas Birch's entries, and his jaw went tighter with each line he matched. March 4th, he said finally. Decker visited the Birch property, claimed it was a friendly call to discuss fencing on the shared boundary. He looked up. Your father wrote it down. Papa wrote everything down, Clara said. So did I, Silas said. Because March 4th is also the day Decker came to see me. Still deputy then. He told me a neighboring rancher had been making noise about water rights and asked if I'd look into it and maybe have a conversation about keeping things settled. He looked at Clara steadily. He wanted me to pressure your father before your father could formalize his complaints about the creek access. What did you do? Clara said. I told him it wasn't my job to run interference for private land disputes, and if Voss had a legal complaint, he could file it at the county office. Silas closed both ledgers flat. 3 weeks later, I was out of a job. Ruth leaned against the counter with her arms crossed and looked at the 2 ledgers on her table. How many of those entries overlap? She said. Enough, Silas said. Enough that when a circuit judge puts both books next to each other, he's not looking at 2 people's opinions. He's looking at a corroborated record. He looked at Ruth. You said Briggs might be in town. Agnes would know, Ruth said. He travels the Millhaven Road, and Agnes is the only place worth stopping between there and the pass. If the storm caught him, that's where he'd be. Agnes Fuller, Silas said. He said it the way you say a name you have a long relationship with. Not all of it easy. She know what's been going on with Voss? Agnes knows everything that goes on in this town, Ruth said. She just makes very careful decisions about when to say so. She's afraid of him, Silas said. She's practical about him, Ruth said. There's a difference. Agnes doesn't do anything out of pure fear. She does things when the calculation says they're survivable. She pushed off the counter. Right now, the calculation has changed. She doesn't know that yet. Silas looked at her. You're going to go tell her. I'm going to write her a letter, Ruth said. And her boy Marcus is going to carry it. Because Marcus moves through that town like he's invisible. And nobody who works for Voss has ever thought to watch a 16-year-old who just looks like he's running errands. In this storm? Marcus has run messages in worse, Ruth said. And Agnes has Judge Briggs sitting in her boarding house, drinking her coffee and waiting for the road to clear. She's not going to pass up what I'm about to tell her. She went to the small desk in the corner of the main room and got paper and a pen and sat down. She wrote for 8 minutes. She did not write flowery language or long explanations. She wrote facts, in order, with names and dates pulled from what Silas had just laid out and what Clara had told her. She sealed it, wrote Agnes Fuller's name on the front, and came back to the kitchen. I need one of you to ride to the edge of my south property, she said to Silas. The fence line where my land meets the Granger Road. Marcus knows that spot. Agnes uses it when she doesn't want people seeing who she's sending to where. You leave the letter on the post, and he'll find it within the hour. Silas stood without debate. He was a man who had been waiting 2 years to be useful in a specific way. And now that the specific way had arrived, he was not going to spend any of it arguing about the details. He took the letter, put it inside his coat, and looked at Clara. You did right, he said. Getting out when you did. Getting here. He said it plain, without softness or apology, the way a man says something when he means it and doesn't feel the need to dress it up. Your father would have done the same. Clara looked at him. He would have done it sooner, she said. And he would have done it better. Something moved in Silas's face. Maybe, he said, but he raised you to do it when he couldn't. That was the point of all of it. He put his hat on. "I'll be back before dark." He went out the back. The house went quiet again. Ruth stood in the kitchen doorway and looked at the two children. Eli had shifted himself from the rug to the chair beside the fire, which was a small promotion and which he had clearly executed while nobody was watching him do it, to avoid being told not to. Clara was sitting at the kitchen table with her hands around a fresh cup of coffee, and she was looking at nothing in particular, with a specific expression of someone who is not seeing what is in front of them, because they are somewhere else entirely. "Clara," Ruth said. The girl came back, blinked once. "Sorry." "Don't apologize. What are you thinking about?" Clara looked down at the cup. "I'm thinking about whether we've done enough," she said. "And whether it matters if we have. If Foss moves before Briggs can do anything official. And I'm thinking about the fact that even if everything works exactly the way you're planning, it doesn't bring Papa back. And at some point, I'm going to have to figure out how to explain that to Eli in a way that doesn't—" She stopped. "In a way that doesn't break him," Ruth said. "He's already trying not to be broken," Clara said. Her voice stayed even, but it cost her. "He thinks if he holds it together it helps me. So he holds it together. And I think the same thing, so I hold it together. And neither of us has—" She stopped again, put the cup down, pressed both hands flat on the table, and looked at them. "Neither of us has said the actual thing yet," she said, out loud, to each other. Ruth sat down across from her. "You don't have to say it today," she said. "I know. But you'll need to say it eventually." "I know that too." Clara looked up. Her eyes were dry. They had been dry every time Ruth had looked at them, and Ruth was beginning to understand that this was not because the girl didn't feel it. It was because she had made a decision at some point in the last 3 days that she was not going to come apart while Eli needed her in one piece. And she had made that decision with the same absolute completeness that she made every other decision. "He used to say grief was something you owed people," Clara said. "Papa. He said when you loved someone and they died, you owed them the time to properly miss them, that cutting it short was a kind of disrespect." She was quiet for a moment. "I owe him a lot of time. I'm just not able to pay it right now." "He'd understand that," Ruth said. "I think he'd say I was being stubborn." "Were you two alike?" Something happened in Clara's face, small and real and entirely unguarded for exactly 2 seconds. "Yes," she said. "Mama used to say we were the same person, 25 years apart, and it was going to be a problem for both of us." "Was it?" "Every day," Clara said, and that was as close to a smile as Ruth had seen from her, and it was enough. From the main room, Eli's voice came through the doorway. "Someone's on the road." Both women were up and moving before he finished the sentence. Ruth was at the window first, a single rider, coming slow from the direction of town. Not Silas, wrong direction, and Silas wouldn't take the main road. Not Decker. Decker rode like he owned every piece of ground under him, and this rider was cautious, picking through the snow carefully. "Do you know that horse?" Ruth said to Clara, who had come to stand at her shoulder. Clara looked. The horse was a bay, older, with a careful gait and a white blaze down the nose. She shook her head. "No." The rider pulled up at the gate, sat there for a moment, then reached up and pushed the hat back, and Ruth saw the face. She let out a slow breath. "That's James Granger," she said. "He runs the feed store on the east end of town. He's been here 30 years. "Voss's man?" Clara said. "I don't know," Ruth said, and that was the honest answer. She didn't know. Granger was a man who had kept himself carefully in the middle of everything for as long as she could remember, which was either the behavior of a man with no spine or the behavior of a man who was biding his time. She had never been sure which. He was looking at the house. He had not come through the gate. He was waiting to be acknowledged, which was either courtesy or calculation. "Stay here," Ruth said to Clara. She picked up the rifle and went to the door. She stepped onto the porch. The cold was immediate and total. She stood in it and looked at Granger at the gate and waited. "Mrs. Calloway," Granger said. He had a dry, careful voice, the voice of a man who has spent a lifetime measuring what he says before he says it. "I heard you might have some company out here." "News moves fast in a storm," Ruth said. "It does," he said, "especially when people want it to." He shifted in the saddle. His hands were easy on the reins, no tension in them, which told Ruth something, but not enough. "I'm not here on anyone's behalf but my own," he said. "I want to be clear about that." "Then what are you here for, James?" He was quiet for a moment. The snow came down between them, steady and indifferent. "I sold my property to Voss 18 months ago," he said. "The North Pasture. 30 acres that my father broke ground on in 1841. He said it without particular emotion, the way a man speaks about a wound that has been closed long enough that he can describe it without feeling the opening of it. He made me an offer I refused 3 times. Then my barn burned." He met her eyes across the distance. They said it was a lantern. The words landed in the cold air between them and stayed there. "I heard the birch barn burned," Granger said. "I heard the same story. Lantern." He looked at his hands on the reins. "I also heard that Thomas Birch's children got out, and I heard where they might have gone." He looked back up at Ruth. "I'm not going to pretend I'm a brave man, Mrs. Calloway. I sold my land, and I kept my mouth shut, and I told myself it was done. But there are things a man can do and things he can't. And showing up to tell Voss where a couple of kids are hiding is something I can't do." He paused. "I came to tell you that Decker is moving tonight. He came to see Sheriff Aldrich an hour ago, and Aldrich gave him a deputy to bring along. They're planning to come here after dark, under color of law. Welfare check on the children, they'll say. Concern for their safety in the storm." Ruth held the rifle loose at her side and looked at James Granger, and made her decision about him in the space of 3 seconds. "Get inside the gate," she said. "You're letting cold air into my yard." He came through. He tied the horse at the post by the barn, came to the porch, and stood there with his hat in his hands, the way a man stands when he is not entirely sure of his welcome and is prepared to earn it. "The other properties," Ruth said. "The ones Voss took. Do you know who else lost a barn before they sold?" Granger looked at her. "I know 2 others for certain," he said, "possibly a third." "Would they talk to a circuit judge?" Something shifted in his face. "Is there one coming?" "There might be," Ruth said. "If this storm holds and the road stays closed, Judge Walter Briggs is sitting in Agnes Fuller's boarding house with nowhere to go. And if Agnes has already read a letter I sent this morning, she may be having a very interesting conversation with him right about now." Granger was still for a long moment. Then he said, "I've got a written record. What I paid, what Voss's men said to me before the barn burned, what Aldrich said when I tried to file a complaint." He paused. "I kept it because my wife told me to. She said someday it would matter." He looked at the snow. "She died last spring, but she was right." "She usually sounds like she was," Ruth said. "Get inside." She brought him into the kitchen, and Granger sat at the table, and Clara came back from the doorway where she had been listening, and stood at the counter with her arms crossed and her eyes on this man, doing her own assessment of him with a patient, unhurried accuracy that Ruth had come to understand was just the way Clara May Birch looked at the world. "You're one of the families," Clara said. Granger looked at her. He seemed to need a moment to adjust to being addressed that directly by a 14-year-old. Then he nodded. "North pasture," he said. 18 months ago. Did you see who burned your barn?" "It was dark," he said. "I heard someone. I didn't see a face." Clara nodded slowly, filing it. "But you'd testify to the pattern," she said. "The offers, the refusals, the fire, the identical story afterward?" "Yes," Granger said. "I would." "Even with Aldrich in Voss's pocket?" "A circuit judge outranks Aldrich," Granger said. "And if Briggs is who I think he is, Aldrich knows better than to put himself between Briggs and a warrant." Ruth was at the window again. The afternoon light was going gray and thin, the way it did in a Wyoming winter when the sun gave up early, which it did most days from November through March. Dark was coming in 3 hours, maybe less, and dark was when Decker was planning to move. She thought about what she had and what she needed. She had Silas's ledger and Thomas Birch's ledger sitting side by side on her kitchen table. She had a letter on its way to Agnes Fuller. She had James Granger and his written record and his willingness to stand up. She had Clara May Birch and a face she was never going to forget. What she needed was time. Just enough time for Agnes to get the letter to Briggs, and for Briggs to do what judges do when someone lays documented criminal evidence in front of them. What was coming at her was Decker, and a bought deputy, and the dark. And they were coming in 3 hours. And the storm, that had been her greatest protection all day, was also the reason she couldn't get out, and Briggs couldn't get here, and every possible piece of help she'd set in motion was on the other side of 4 feet of snow and a road that had ceased to exist. She turned from the window. Clara was watching her. The girl had a quality Ruth had noticed from the first hour. She could read a room the way she read the sky, looking at the signs and assembling them into something accurate without being told what they meant. "They're coming tonight," Clara said. Not a question. "Yes," Ruth said, "and we can't get Briggs here before they do." "No." Clara was quiet for a moment. Then she uncrossed her arms and stood up straight and looked at Ruth with that clear, decided face. "Then we make them come to the door and find something they didn't plan for," she said. "What did you have in mind?" Ruth said. Clara looked at Granger. She looked at Eli, who had moved himself to the kitchen doorway and was leaning against the frame, with his bad leg taking careful weight, and his eyes entirely alert. She looked back at Ruth. "Witnesses," she said. "That's all we need to get through tonight. If Decker comes here under color of law to remove 2 children from a private residence, and there are 4 adults who can say exactly what they saw and heard, and what was said and done, he can't make it disappear the way he makes things disappear when there's nobody watching." She put both hands flat on the table. "He needs this to look clean. That's the only reason he's bringing a deputy instead of just coming himself. He needs it to look like law." She met Ruth's eyes. "So we make it impossible for it to look like anything except what it is." Ruth looked at this girl. This 14-year-old girl who had walked 2 miles through a blizzard carrying her brother, who had not cried once in 2 days, who had laid out a legal and strategic argument at Ruth Calloway's kitchen table, with the same flat clarity her father had apparently used to document every single threat made against him in 11 years of standing his ground. "You're going to be something," Ruth said. She said it quietly, the way you say a thing you are certain of. Clara looked at her. "I'm going to get my father's land back first," she said. "Then we'll see." Outside, the snow kept falling, and the light kept fading, and somewhere on the road between Greystone Pass and the Calloway Ranch, time was running in one direction only. And inside a warm office in town, a man who smiled with only his mouth was looking at a clock on his wall and telling Cole Decker to be ready at dark. Silas came back through the back door 40 minutes before dark, shaking snow from his coat. And the look on his face when he came into the kitchen told Ruth everything before he opened his mouth. "Agnes got the letter," he said. Ruth let out a breath. "And Briggs?" "Briggs is there." Silas pulled out a chair and sat down heavily, the way a man sits when he has been moving fast through difficult terrain, and his body is done pretending it isn't 61 years old. Agnes read the letter, walked straight into her dining room, and sat down across from him. Marcus was still there. He heard the whole thing. He looked around the table, at Granger, at Clara, at Eli in the doorway. Briggs asked 3 questions. How many ledgers? How many witnesses? And are the children safe? Agnes told him 2 ledgers, at least 4 witnesses, and she believed the children were safe as of this morning, but that the situation was likely to change before nightfall. "What did he say?" Clara said. "He said he needed paper and an inkwell, and whoever Agnes could get him in the next 2 hours who was willing to sign a sworn statement." Silas reached into his coat and pulled out a folded piece of paper. He also sent this. He put it on the table. Ruth unfolded it. It was short, written in the precise, compressed hand of a man who has spent decades putting important things into the smallest possible space. It said, "Mrs. Calloway, hold the position. Do not allow removal of the children under any circumstances short of lethal force. I am issuing a preliminary injunction against interference with the Birch estate and its heirs, effective immediately. This document constitutes official notice. Keep it visible. Judge W. Briggs, Circuit Court, Wyoming Territory." Ruth read it twice. Then she set it flat on the table where everyone could see it. Clara leaned forward and read it without touching it. When she finished, she sat back and pressed her lips together and said nothing for a moment. Then she said, "That's a piece of paper." "It's a federal judge's piece of paper," Silas said. "Decker doesn't strike me as a man who stops for paper," Clara said. "No," Silas agreed. "But the deputy he's bringing does. Because a deputy who ignores a circuit court injunction isn't a deputy anymore. And he's not immune from prosecution. And Decker's employer can't protect him from a federal charge the way he can protect him from a county one." He looked at Clara steadily. "It changes what tonight looks like. It doesn't make tonight safe, but it changes it." Ruth folded the paper carefully and put it in the inside pocket of her vest, close to her chest. "How many people did Agnes have for Briggs?" she said. "4 when Marcus left," Silas said. "Agnes herself, Varen Colton. He's been keeping his own account of what's happened to this town, and he was apparently waiting for precisely this kind of reason to open it. A woman named Pearl Hutchins, whose husband sold the Eastern Creek property to Voss 2 years ago, and has been sick with it ever since." He paused. "And one more." He looked at Granger. "Your name came up. Agnes mentioned you might have records." Granger was quiet for a moment. He had his hat in his hands, and he was turning it slowly, the way a man turns something when his hands need to be occupied, while his mind does the actual work. "My records are at the store," he said finally. "I can get them." "In this weather?" Ruth said. "It's a 20-minute ride." He looked at her. "And if what I've got puts another property in the pattern alongside yours and Silas's and the birch land, it's worth 20 minutes in the snow." He stood up, put his hat on, and looked at Clara with an expression that had something complicated in it, that was not quite apology and not quite the thing that comes after apology, but was somewhere in the territory between them. "Your father came to me once," he said, "about 8 months ago. He asked me if I'd stand up with him, if it came to that. I told him I'd think about it." He stopped. "I should have said yes then." Clara looked at him. She did not offer him absolution, and she did not withhold it. She just looked at him with those dark, clear eyes and said, "Go get your records, Mr. Granger." He went. Ruth watched him ride out through the back fence line, and then turned back to the room and began doing what she had been doing in her mind for the past 2 hours, which was turning the house into something that was going to be as difficult as possible to do the wrong thing inside of. She moved the lamps. She put one in the front window and one in the kitchen window, and left the main room relatively dim, because people who come to a door in the dark are looking for what they can see through the glass, and she wanted them to see exactly what she decided they should see, and nothing else. She checked every lock again, not because she expected them to have changed, but because checking gave her hands something to do and her mind something concrete to rest on, while the larger and less manageable thoughts moved through the background. Silas took up a position in the main room with a clear line to the front door. He did it without being asked, without discussion, with the quiet efficiency of a man who has done this kind of thing before and remembers how. Clara put Eli in the back room. She did it the way she did everything, without drama, without excessive explanation. She helped him to the back room, got him settled on the cot Ruth had indicated, checked his leg without being asked, and then stood in the doorway and looked at him with a particular expression she got when she was about to say something she had thought about carefully. "I need you to stay here," she said. "I know," Eli said. "Not because you can't help, because you're the most important thing here, and I need to know exactly where you are." Eli looked at her. He had his father's eyes, and, Ruth was beginning to think, his father's particular quality of stillness under pressure. "Clara," he said. "What?" "I'm scared." She crossed to him and sat on the edge of the cot and put her hand on his face the same way she had that first night, and she looked at him directly. "Me too," she said. "Are you going to be okay out there?" "Yes." "You don't know that?" "No," she said, "but I know I'm going to do everything I can. And I know Ruth's out there, and Silas is out there, and Mr. Granger's coming back, and I know what Papa used to say about the odds." She looked at him steadily. "What did he say?" Eli was quiet for a moment. Then, "He said the odds are just a way of counting before you know how it ends." "That's right." She took her hand back. "So we don't count yet. We just do the next thing." She stood up. "You hear anything that isn't my voice or Ruth's, you go under the floor. You know where the handle is. Third plank from the left. Don't come out until I call you, not for any reason." "I know." She looked at him for one more second, the way you look at something you are not willing to consider losing. Then she went back out and pulled the door most of the way closed behind her. Ruth was in the kitchen when Clara came back through. She had the rifle on the table in front of her, and she was writing something, moving the pen fast and sure. "What's that?" Clara said. "An account of tonight," Ruth said. "What I expect to happen and in what order. Everything I've already sent to Agnes. Everything Silas has in his ledger. Everything Granger told me this afternoon. I'm dating it and signing it." She kept writing. "If something goes wrong tonight, this goes with the other documents. It puts this house on the record before Decker gets here." Clara pulled out the chair across from her and sat down and picked up the pen when Ruth set it aside and read what Ruth had written. All of it, line by line, with the focused attention she gave to everything. Then she picked up the pen and signed her name at the bottom, under Ruth's. Ruth looked at the signature. "You don't have to." "I'm a witness to everything in this document," Clara said. "My name belongs there." She set the pen down. "Papa used to say that the only thing a document is worth is the willingness of the people who sign it to stand behind it in public." Ruth folded the paper and put it with Briggs's injunction inside her vest. 2 pieces of paper, close to her heart, which was not a romantic notion, but a practical one. If she went down tonight, whoever found her would find them, and they would be dry and legible and signed. The dark came in the way dark always came in Wyoming winter, not gradually, but in a decisive dropping of the light that left you slightly surprised, even when you had been watching for it. One moment there was gray, the next moment there was not. They heard the horses at the same time. Ruth's hand found the rifle without looking. Silas was already at the window in the main room. Clara stood up from the kitchen table and stood very still for exactly 2 seconds, and Ruth watched her and saw the moment the stillness resolved into something that was not calm exactly, but was the next thing past it. The thing that comes when you have been frightened as long as fear is useful, and now you need something steadier. "How many?" Ruth said to Silas. "3," Silas said. "Decker and 2 others. One of them's a badge. You can see it catch the light." He turned from the window. "Granger's not back yet." "He'll come when he comes," Ruth said. "We work with what we have." She looked at Clara. "Back room." "No," Clara said. "Clara, no." Her voice was not loud and it was not defiant. It was just completely immovable. "I'm a witness. You said it yourself. The whole point of tonight is witnesses. I'm the one who saw his face. I'm the one who can put Cole Decker at that barn. If I'm in the back room, I'm not in this room. And if I'm not in this room, there's a witness you don't have." She looked at Ruth steadily. "Put me where I can see, but they can't see me clearly. I'll stay quiet until you need me." Ruth looked at her. She thought about arguing. She recognized almost immediately that arguing was going to cost her time and not change the outcome. "Corner by the pantry door," she said. "You don't move and you don't speak unless I tell you to." Clara moved to the corner and stood against the wall, back straight, hands at her sides, and went still. She had a quality when she went still, of becoming almost architecturally part of whatever space she was in. Ruth had noticed it before. It was the quality of someone who had spent time being somewhere they needed to not be noticed. The knock came at the front door. 3 knocks. Official. The knock of a man who has decided to frame this as law rather than force, at least for the opening of it. Ruth walked to the door. She put her hand on the bolt. She took 2 full breaths. Then she opened it. Cole Decker stood on her porch. He had the charcoal coat and the hat and the practiced patience and the scar along his jaw that Clara May Birch had put into her memory and was never going to let go of. Behind him, 1 step back and to the left, was a young man with a deputy's badge who had the look of someone who had been told this was a routine welfare check and was only now beginning to sense that the word routine had been used loosely. Behind the deputy, further back, was a 3rd man Ruth didn't recognize, heavy-set, standing at the foot of the porch steps with his hands loose at his sides. "Mrs. Calloway," Decker said. "Sorry to come so late. This couldn't wait for morning." "Most things that can't wait for morning shouldn't be done at night," Ruth said. "What do you need, Mr. Decker?" "We have reason to believe there are 2 minors on this property," he said. "Children who have been missing from their legal place of residence since the day before yesterday. We're here out of concern for their welfare." "That's very thoughtful of you," Ruth said. "If you could just let us come inside and confirm they're here and in good health." "I'm going to stop you there," Ruth said. She reached into her vest and brought out Briggs's paper and held it up, unfolded, in the lantern light, where Decker could read it without her handing it to him. "Circuit Court Injunction, signed by Judge Walter Briggs this afternoon, prohibiting any interference with the persons or property of the Birch heirs." She kept her voice entirely level. "That includes removal from a private residence where they are being given lawful shelter." Something happened in Decker's face. It was fast and well controlled, but it happened. A tightening behind the eyes, a fractional shift in the set of his jaw. Then the careful professional surface came back. "I'm not aware of any injunction," he said. "That's what it means to be surprised by one," Ruth said. "Judge Briggs is currently at Agnes Fuller's boarding house, Mr. Decker. He has been there since the storm closed the road this morning. He has spent this afternoon taking sworn statements from no fewer than 4 people regarding Harlan Voss's land acquisition practices in this county over the past 3 years." The young deputy behind Decker took an almost imperceptible step back. Ruth noticed. She kept her eyes on Decker. "This is a welfare check," Decker said. His voice had gone very flat. "It has nothing to do with—" "The deputy behind you," Ruth said, "is about to make a decision about his career and his freedom at the same time. Because if he steps into this house without a warrant, in violation of a federal circuit court injunction, that decision follows him for the rest of his life." She looked past Decker directly at the young deputy. "That's not a threat. That's an explanation. I think you're owed an accurate one before you decide what to do." The deputy looked at Decker. Decker did not look back at him. Silas moved then. He came from the main room to stand at Ruth's shoulder, and the 2 ledgers were in his hands, held flat and visible. 2 thick, cloth-bound books that represented 4 years of careful record-keeping by 2 different men who had both decided, separately and at great personal cost, that some things needed to be written down because someday someone was going to need to read them. "Cole Decker," Silas said. He said it the way a man says a name he has had a long and specific relationship with. "I've got your name in this ledger 11 times across 2 years. Dates, locations, and what you said and did at each one." He held the books up slightly higher. "So does Thomas Birch's. And James Granger is on his way back from his feed store right now with a 3rd set of records that puts you at his property the month before his barn burned." He let that sit for exactly the right amount of time. "I was law in this county for 8 years before Voss decided he wanted different law. I know what a prosecutable pattern looks like. And what's in these 2 books is one." Decker looked at Silas. He looked at the ledgers. He looked at Ruth. He was doing mathematics behind his eyes. Ruth could see it. The fast, cold calculation of a man who has built his whole professional life on arriving at situations more prepared than the people he's arriving to deal with, and who has just encountered a situation where someone else got there first. The 3rd man at the bottom of the porch steps shifted his weight. Decker looked at him without turning his head all the way, just a fractional angle. And something passed between them that Ruth read as clearly as if it had been spoken out loud. "Not tonight." "This isn't over," Decker said. "No," Ruth said. "It isn't. But this part of it is." She held his gaze. "You go back to Harlan Voss, and you tell him that Judge Walter Briggs has a room at Agnes Fuller's boarding house, and 2 ledgers of documented evidence, and 4 sworn statements, and 1 eyewitness who is never going to forget his face. And you tell him that the next conversation between him and this county happens in a courtroom." She kept her voice level and clear and entirely without heat, because heat was the wrong register for this moment. Heat was for people who weren't sure they were going to win. And you tell him to get a lawyer before that conversation happens, because he is going to need more than one. Decker held her gaze for a long, absolute moment. Then Clara May Birch walked out of the corner by the pantry door. She walked to Ruth's side and stood there in the lamplight, straight-backed and still, and she looked at Cole Decker the way a person looks at someone they have been carrying in their memory for 3 days, like a coal that hadn't gone cold. And her face was entirely composed, and entirely present, and entirely certain. "I saw you," she said, "the night of the fire, from the loft window. You looked back once when you were walking away." She did not raise her voice. She did not tremble. She just said the true thing the way true things get said by people who have been waiting for exactly the right moment to say them. I remember your face. I'm going to remember it in front of Judge Briggs. I'm going to remember it in front of every person in that courtroom. And I'm going to remember it correctly, because I have a good memory, and my father taught me to use it. The porch was absolutely silent. The deputy behind Decker took a full step back this time. Not subtle, deliberate. Decker looked at Clara May Birch. He looked at her the way a man looks at something he had calculated as a minor variable and has just understood was never a variable at all. Something moved through his face that was not guilt exactly, but was the thing that lives next door to it. The thing that comes when a person suddenly sees the full shape of what they have done laid out in front of them by the person most qualified to describe it. He put his hat back on. He turned and walked off the porch without another word. The deputy followed him fast, with the particular speed of a man who is making a decision he should have made before he got on the horse. The third man at the bottom of the steps was already moving. Ruth stood in the doorway and held the rifle and watched all three of them go, and did not move until the sound of hooves had faded entirely into the snow and the dark. Then she turned around. Clara was still standing where she had been. Her hands were at her sides, and her chin was up, and she was looking at the empty road with an expression that Ruth could not name exactly, but which she understood completely. It was the expression of a person who has done the thing they came to do and is now, for the first time, feeling the full weight of how much it cost to get here. "You did that on your own," Ruth said quietly. "I didn't tell you to come out." "I know," Clara said, "but he needed to see me." She paused. "And I needed him to see that I wasn't afraid of him." "Were you?" Ruth said. "Afraid?" Clara turned and looked at her. "Yes," she said, "but Papa said courage isn't the absence of fear. It's doing the thing while you're afraid of it." She looked back at the road. "So I did the thing." From the back room came the sound of a door opening, and then Eli's careful footsteps in the hallway, favoring his bad leg, coming toward them. "Clara?" he said. "Here," she said. He came into the light and looked at his sister, and then at the open front door and the empty porch beyond it. "They're gone?" he said. "They're gone," Ruth said. He looked at Clara for a long moment. "You went out there," he said. He didn't make it a question because he already knew. "Yes," she said. "I told you to stay in the corner." "You told me to stay where they couldn't see me clearly," she said. "I made a judgment call about when that condition had changed." Eli stared at her. Then he said, with a gravity that belonged to someone considerably older than 9, "Papa would say you were being stubborn." "Papa would say I was right," Clara said. "He'd say both things," Eli said, "at the same time." And Clara May Birch, for the second time in 4 days, almost smiled. It lasted 3 seconds, but it was real. Behind them all, in the road that was still empty and the snow that was still falling, a man in a charcoal coat was riding back toward Greystone Pass, with no children and no deed, and the image of a 14-year-old girl standing in a doorway, burning in his mind like something he was not going to be able to put out. And in Agnes Fuller's boarding house, a lamp was burning in the window of the front parlor, and behind it, a gray-haired man with tired eyes and a lifetime of circuit court decisions behind him was reading the last page of a ledger and reaching for his pen. Granger came back an hour after Decker left. He came through the back gate the way Silas had, off the road, moving careful through the snow with a saddlebag over his shoulder, and the particular expression of a man who has been riding through a Wyoming blizzard at night and has made peace with the discomfort of it, because the reason he is doing it is worth more than the comfort he left behind. Ruth let him in, and he sat down at the kitchen table and opened the saddlebag and put 3 things on the table. A ledger, thinner than Silas's, but dense with careful entries. A bundle of letters tied with twine, which he set beside the ledger without explanation. And a folded document that he smoothed flat with both hands before he spoke. "That's the original sale agreement," he said. "The one I signed for the North Pasture. Look at the date, and then look at the date on the letter on top of that bundle." Ruth picked up the top letter. She read the date. She read the date on the sale agreement. She set them both back down. "He sent you the threat letter 4 days before you signed," she said. "The day after my barn burned," Granger said. "The letter arrived the day after the fire, before the ash was cold, offering to buy the North Pasture at a price that was exactly half what it was worth. Worded very carefully. No explicit threats, just a very specific mention of how unfortunate it was that accidents happened on isolated properties, and how much easier life was for families who weren't carrying the burden of land they couldn't adequately protect." He looked at the letter lying there on the table. "I signed 4 days later, because I had a wife who was already sick, and 2 children and a barn that was gone, and a sheriff who had told me he'd looked into it and found no evidence of foul play." He paused. "I have hated that signature every day since I made it." "You're here now," Ruth said. "Barely in time," he said. "Barely in time is still in time," she said. "Don't waste it on the part you can't change." She looked at Clara, who was reading the letter over Ruth's shoulder with her characteristic, focused silence. Clara finished, set it back, and looked at Granger. "The letter is written in the same pattern as the offers Voss made to my father," she said. "Same language, same structure, specific without being explicit." She looked at Ruth. "If Briggs has seen this letter, and my father's letters, and whatever else Agnes has put in front of him tonight, he's looking at a template. Not a coincidence. A method." "That's what a pattern is," Silas said from the doorway. "It's not one man's bad luck. It's one man's system." Ruth picked up her coat. "I'm going to Agnes," she said. Everyone in the room looked at her. "Tonight?" Silas said. "The storm is exactly why Decker's not going to be on that road right now," Ruth said. "He went back to Voss to report. Voss is going to spend tonight calculating his next move, which means the road between here and Agnes's boarding house is the safest it's going to be for the next 12 hours. She was already buttoning. "I need to put these documents in front of Briggs tonight. Not tomorrow. Tonight. Because tomorrow Voss makes his next move, and I want Briggs 3 steps ahead of it before he does." She looked at Clara. "You stay here with Silas and Granger. Both ledgers, your father's and Silas's, stay in this house until I come back. You do not open the door for anyone. You know the procedure." "Third plank from the left," Eli said from the hallway. "That's right," Ruth said. Clara was looking at her the way she looked at everything, steady and evaluating, and a little ahead of where the conversation was. "Take Granger's documents with you," she said. "All 3 of them. The ledger, the letters, the sale agreement. Briggs needs the whole picture tonight." "I was going to," Ruth said. "I know," Clara said. "I just wanted to say it out loud, so it was said." Ruth almost smiled. She picked up the rifle, picked up the saddlebag with Granger's documents added to her own, and looked around the kitchen one more time at these people who had ended up here by a collection of individual decisions, each of which had seemed either brave or foolish at the time, depending on who was making the assessment. "Lock it behind me," she said. She went out into the snow. The ride to Agnes Fuller's boarding house took 35 minutes instead of the usual 20, because the road was obliterated, and Ruth was navigating by memory and by the feel of the ground under the horse's feet. That specific sensory knowledge that comes from 20 years on the same land in every kind of weather. She did not push the horse. She let it find the path, and she kept her eyes forward. And she thought about Thomas Birch, who had documented 11 years of refusing to sell and had trusted his daughter with the proof of it when he understood the refusing was going to cost him everything. She thought about what kind of man builds that kind of record. Quiet, methodical, not dramatic about it, just writing things down because he understood that the truth needed somewhere to live if it was going to survive. His daughter had inherited that quality entirely. Agnes Fuller opened the boarding house door before Ruth's horse had fully stopped, which meant Agnes had been watching the road, which meant Agnes had been expecting her, which meant Agnes Fuller was exactly the woman Ruth had always believed her to be when the situation was finally serious enough to require it. "Get inside," Agnes said. "You look like a snowdrift with opinions." Ruth got inside. Agnes Fuller was 63 years old and had the appearance of a woman who had decided somewhere in her 40s that life was too short for any artifice except the deliberate kind. She was small and sharp-eyed and moved through her own boarding house with the absolute authority of someone who knows every inch of a space and has decided everything that happens within it. She had gray hair pinned back without ceremony, and hands that had worked hard for 60 years, and a voice that carried without being raised. "He's in the front parlor," Agnes said, taking Ruth's coat. "He's been there since 8 o'clock. He read everything I gave him, and he asked me 7 questions, and then he sat down and started writing, and he hasn't stopped." She looked at the saddlebag. "Is that more?" "Granger came to me tonight," Ruth said. "He's got documentation going back 2 years. Original sale agreement with a threat letter dated 4 days before he signed." Agnes was still for exactly 1 second. Then she took the saddlebag from Ruth's hand. "Sit down," she said. "I'll take this in. You're not going in there looking like you just rode through a wall." "Agnes, sit down, Ruth. You've done the hard part. Let me do this part." Ruth sat down. She sat in Agnes's hallway on the wooden bench that had been there since the boarding house was built. And she listened to Agnes's footsteps go down the hall, and a door open and close, and the low murmur of voices beyond it. And she looked at her own hands in her lap, and thought about all the things that were now in motion that she had no more control over. And she made peace with that, the way you make peace with weather. Not happily, but practically, because there is no other option. The door at the end of the hall opened again. Agnes came back, and behind her was a man Ruth had never met, but recognized immediately from everything she had been told. Walter Briggs was 70 years old, and looked like someone had decided to put a lifetime of difficult decisions into a person and see what shape they made on the way out. He was not tall, and he was not large, but he had a quality of presence that had nothing to do with size. The quality of a man who has spent decades walking into rooms where the stakes were the highest they were going to be, and has learned to carry that without letting it carry him. He had a gray beard trimmed close, and eyes that were tired and entirely awake at the same time. And he was carrying Granger's ledger in one hand, and Ruth's signed account in the other. "Mrs. Calloway," he said. "Judge Briggs," she said. "Sit with me," he said. They sat in the front parlor, the two of them across from each other at Agnes's good table, and Briggs set the documents between them and put his hands flat on the table and looked at her. "The girl," he said. "Clara Birch. Tell me about her." Ruth told him. She told him from the beginning, from the pounding at 3 in the morning, from the 4 words spoken in her doorway, from every conversation in the days since. She told it the way Clara told things, in order, without decoration, letting the facts do the work. Briggs listened the way Silas had listened, without interrupting, without filling in what he thought she meant, with the complete focused attention of a man who understands that listening correctly is half the job. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "She's 14 years old," he said. "Yes." "And she walked 2 miles in a blizzard, carrying her brother." "Yes." "And she stood in that doorway tonight and said it to his face. Yes, Ruth said. She did. Briggs looked down at the documents on the table. He tapped Silas's ledger once with 2 fingers. I've been on the circuit for 22 years, he said. I have had cases with more dramatic evidence. I have had cases with more witnesses. I have had cases with louder advocates and bigger lawyers and more money on more sides than I care to remember. He looked up at Ruth. I have rarely had a case where the documentary record was this clean and this corroborated. 2 men keeping separate records over overlapping periods with matching dates and names. A sale agreement signed under documented duress. A minor eyewitness with no motive to fabricate and every reason to be accurate. He paused. And a pattern. 6 properties in 3 years. Same method, same timeline, same language in the offers. He said it the way a man says something he has been building toward for a long time. That is not opportunism, Mrs. Calloway. That is a system. And a system can be prosecuted as a system. What happens now? Ruth said. I issue a full injunction tonight, protecting the Birch property and its heirs from any transfer, sale, or interference pending formal proceedings. He said it like he was reciting items from a list he had already written in his head. I issue a warrant for the arrest of Cole Decker on charges of arson and murder in connection with the death of Thomas Birch. I issue a warrant for Harlan Voss on charges of criminal conspiracy, coercion, and complicity in the same. He looked at Ruth steadily. I will need the children here in the morning to give formal statements under oath, and I will need every witness who signed anything tonight to be available for formal proceedings when I schedule them. They'll be here, Ruth said, including the girl. Especially the girl, Ruth said. You won't have to ask her twice. Briggs nodded once. He picked up his pen and opened his notebook and began to write. And Ruth understood that she had been dismissed, not rudely, but in the way that a man dismisses someone when the conversation is complete and the work is ready to begin. And she stood, and Agnes was already at the parlor door with Ruth's dried coat in her hands. You did right, Agnes said quietly, helping Ruth into it. She said it the same way Silas had said it to Clara, plain and without softness, the way you say a thing you mean entirely. Coming tonight, pushing it through tonight instead of waiting. It needed to be tonight, Ruth said. I know, Agnes said. I just wanted to say it, so it was said. Ruth looked at her. You've been waiting for this, she said. For a reason to move. Agnes looked back at her with those sharp, quiet eyes. I've been watching this town give itself away piece by piece for 3 years, she said. I've been watching people I've known for 30 years decide that looking away was the same as being safe. She straightened the collar of Ruth's coat with a precise, final gesture. It isn't. It never was. The only thing looking away ever did was make you complicit in what happened while you were looking somewhere else. She paused. I should have moved sooner. We all should have. You moved when you could move and it count, Ruth said. That's what matters now. She rode back through the snow. The warrant for Harlan Voss was executed the following morning by a federal marshal who had ridden through the night from Millhaven when Briggs sent word, arriving in Greystone Pass just as the storm finally broke and the sky went from white to the particular pale blue that Wyoming produces in winter when it decides to be beautiful about it. Ruth was not there for the arrest. She heard about it afterward from Silas, who had ridden to town early and come back with the kind of expression a man carries when something he has been waiting for a long time has finally happened, and he is still in the process of believing it is real. He argued, Silas said, sitting at Ruth's kitchen table with his hands wrapped around a cup of coffee. Told the marshal it was a misunderstanding. Said Briggs was overstepping his jurisdiction. Said he had lawyers in 3 cities. He shook his head slowly. The marshal said that was fine. He was welcome to send for all of them, and in the meantime, he'd be accommodated at the county jail, pending formal hearing. He looked up. It took 6 minutes. I counted. Cole Decker was arrested an hour later, trying to leave the county on the Millhaven Road. He went quietly, which Silas said was the most telling thing about it. A man who goes quietly when he has no leverage is a man who already knows the evidence and has decided that fighting it is not survivable. Clara and Eli gave their formal statements to Judge Briggs that morning in Agnes Fuller's front parlor. Ruth sat in the corner while they did it, not because they needed her there, but because she had decided she was going to be there, and nobody had told her not to. Clara went first. She sat across from Briggs and told it in sequence, the same way she had told it to Ruth, to Silas, to Granger, with the same flat precision and the same complete reliability of someone who knows exactly what she saw and is not going to add to it or subtract from it to make it easier to hear. When she described the night of the fire, when she described the man walking away from the timber barn and looking back, when she said, for the official record, the name Cole Decker, her voice did not waver once. Briggs looked at her when she finished. "Miss Birch," he said, "I have to ask you directly. Is there anything in what you've told me that is uncertain? Any detail that you are less than fully confident in?" Clara looked at him. "No, sir," she said. "There is not." "You understand that what you've stated here becomes part of a formal proceeding?" "Yes, sir. And you understand that you will be required to say it again, in a courtroom, in front of other people, including defense counsel, who will try to find inconsistencies." "They won't find any," Clara said, "because there aren't any. I said what happened. That's all that's in there." Briggs looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, "Your father kept very careful records." Clara was still for one beat. "He was that kind of man," she said. "So are you," Briggs said quietly. "The kind who keeps records. The kind who pays attention." He looked down at his notebook. "This county is fortunate you have that quality, Miss Birch." Clara did not answer right away. When she did, it was quiet and entirely without performance. "My father had it too," she said. "It just didn't protect him in time." "No," Briggs said. "It didn't. But it's protecting his children now. And it's going to protect a great many other people in this county before this proceeding is done." He closed the notebook. That was what he was building it for. I think he knew that. Clara pressed her lips together once, held something private, and then let it go. "Yes," she said. "I think he did too." Eli went next. He sat in the same chair his sister had sat in, and he told what he knew. The gray horse with the black mane and the white sock. The 2 visits to the property. The conversation with his father that he had kept to himself for weeks because his father told him to. He told it with the same clear-eyed directness his sister had, and when he was done, Briggs thanked him, and Eli nodded once and looked at his hands and said, "Is it enough? What we have? Is it enough to keep our land?" Briggs looked at this 9-year-old boy. "Yes," he said, "it is." Eli nodded again. Something in him settled. Ruth could see it from the corner, some specific held tension releasing from his small shoulders. The weight of a thing he had been carrying without knowing exactly how much it weighed until the moment it was taken. The formal hearing was scheduled for 6 weeks out, to allow time for the circuit proceeding to be properly constituted. Harlan Voss's lawyers arrived from 2 cities within 4 days, which told everyone what Voss thought the evidence looked like. What they found when they arrived was 3 separate ledgers, 1 eyewitness of impeccable credibility, 5 corroborating testimonies from landowners who had spent the past 2 years deciding whether they were done being afraid, and a circuit judge who had been on the bench for 22 years and had absolutely no interest in being handled by anyone's lawyers from anywhere. The hearing lasted 3 days. Ruth attended all of it. She sat in the second row of the Greystone Pass Town Hall on a wooden bench that was not designed for comfort, and she watched the proceedings with the focused attention of someone who has been part of a thing and wants to see it through to its completion. Clara testified on the second day. She walked to the front of that room with her back straight and her hands at her sides, and she stood before Judge Briggs and a hall full of people, and she said what she had seen one more time, in the same order, with the same precision. And when the defense counsel tried to find the edges of her certainty, she told him, without heat and without hesitation, that there were no edges, because she had seen what she had seen, and she had a good memory, and her father had taught her to use it. The defense counsel sat down after 4 questions. He had done enough cases to recognize when he was doing himself more damage than the witness. Voss was convicted on all charges. The sentencing took another 2 weeks, and it was thorough, and it was public, and it went into the record of Greystone Pass County as the most consequential ruling issued in that jurisdiction in 20 years. Coldecker pled and cooperated and received a reduced sentence that was its own kind of justice. Not the full accounting, but enough. His cooperation put 3 additional incidents on the formal record that widened the case beyond what even Briggs had expected when he sat in Agnes Fuller's parlor, reading ledgers by lamplight. Sheriff Aldrich resigned the week of the conviction, without being asked to. He left Greystone Pass on a Tuesday morning, and nobody organized a farewell, and nobody was particularly surprised. The Birch property deed was confirmed, recorded, and filed with the county office on a Friday in late February, on a morning when the first suggestion of a thaw was in the air, still weeks away from anything real, but present enough to remind you that it was coming. Ruth drove Clara and Eli out to the homestead that same afternoon. She brought lumber in the wagon bed. Silas came behind her with more. Granger came with 2 men from his feed store. Agnes Fuller came, which surprised several people, and surprised Ruth not at all. They stood at the edge of what had been the house, and looked at what remained of it, and Clara and Eli stood together in front of the ruin of what had been their home, and neither of them spoke for a long time. Then Eli reached over and took his sister's hand. Clara looked down at his hand in hers. Then she looked up at the people who had come, at Ruth and Silas and Granger and Agnes and the others, at this collection of people who had gotten up on a February morning and driven out here to help put something back together that someone else had knocked down. "Thank you," she said. Quiet, entirely real. "All of you." She looked at Ruth directly when she said it, and Ruth gave her one single nod back, small and certain, just enough. Then Clara squared her shoulders. "Let's build it back," she said. They worked through the afternoon. It was the hard, honest kind of work that strips everything down to its essentials and leaves no room for anything that doesn't contribute. Ruth worked beside Clara, and she watched this girl move through the labor with the same quality she moved through everything, present and precise and entirely without complaint. Eli worked alongside the men, and each time Ruth caught his eye, he had a look of focused satisfaction, the look of a person doing something that matters and knowing it. At some point in the late afternoon, when the frame of the new house was standing and the worst of the cold had begun to ease at the edges, Clara came to where Ruth was working and stood beside her without speaking for a moment. Then she reached into her coat pocket and held out a small glass jar sealed with wax. Inside it, dried and papery and entirely intact, were seeds. Dozens of them. "Papa kept these in the root cellar," Clara said. "The fire didn't reach it. Wildflower seeds. He saved the best ones every summer." She turned the jar in her hand. "There's a stand of cottonwood trees at the north end of the property. He loved that spot. "I'm going to plant these there." She paused. "This fall and every fall after." Ruth looked at the jar, then at Clara's face. "He'd want something growing there," Ruth said. "He'd want us growing there," Clara said. "That was the whole point of everything he built." She put the jar back in her pocket. She looked at the standing frame of the new house, at Eli laughing at something Silas had said, at the people moving through the structure they were putting back together, piece by piece, from what had been taken apart. "He held the land for us," she said, "not for himself. For us, so we'd have somewhere to stand." Ruth was quiet for a moment. "You've got somewhere to stand," she said. Clara looked at her. "We both do," she said. The "we" sat in the air between them, plain and unhurried, not asking to be acknowledged, just resting there the way true things rest when they have finally been said. Ruth looked out at the new frame against the winter sky and thought about Daniel, about the first winter on her own land, about all the years she had spent being contained and managed and responsible only for herself, and about a 3 a.m. knock on her door that had ended every version of that life without asking permission. She did not mourn it. That evening, after the others had gone home, Ruth stayed to finish the window framing on the south wall. Clara held the lantern. Eli slept in the corner of the new room on a folded blanket, with the total surrender of a child who has finally run out of things to stay awake for. Ruth drove the last nail and stepped back and looked at what the day had built. "It's good," Clara said. "It'll hold," Ruth said. She looked at Clara. "So will you." Clara looked back at her with those dark, clear eyes that had seen more than they should have seen at 14, and had decided, somewhere in the seeing of it, not to look away. "So will we," she said. And the way she said it was not a question, and not a hope. It was the statement of a fact that had already been established. In a kitchen at 3 a.m, in a doorway in the snow, in a courtroom in February, and in every hard, true moment between. Ruth Calloway put her hammer in her belt and picked up her hat and looked one last time at the standing frame of a house being rebuilt, and the sleeping boy in the corner, and the girl holding the lantern with her father's wildflower seeds in her pocket. And she understood, with the quiet certainty of a woman who has learned to recognize the things that are permanent when they arrive, that this was what it looked like when something broken decided to become something new. She put her hat on. And in Greystone Pass, Wyoming Territory, in the winter of 1878, that was the most certain thing anyone had said in a very long time. And it held, the way good things hold, through every season that followed.